All right, I will say good evening. Such a schos Baruch Hashem to get begin the day in the base medrash, to get the end of the day in the base medrash. Doesn't get better than this. So I will say, so today's Amud is Gimel Amud Aleph. So we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on. We are picking up on Beis Amud Beis 2b, and we left off 4 lines up from the bottom. So the Gemara says as follows: Amar Rabbi Yehuda. So if you remember again in yesterday's Amud, so we went through a number of different options in terms of when could one begin to recite the nighttime Shema. So one of the things that was mentioned ultimately again was the time that the Kohanim go to the mikvah. So remember again, the problem with that position is we learned this summer. When do Kohanim go to the mikvah? When? Day number 7. They're going during the day. So what does that mean? That you can say Kriyas Shema during the day? That sounds a little bit strange. So Amud Rabbi Yehuda, Kohanim go to the mikvah by day. So Shapir come to Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir. So again, Rabbi Yehuda is saying good. He's saying good. Rabbi Meir, how can you possibly say that the time for nighttime Shema is when the Kohanim go to the mikvah? The Kohanim could go to the mikvah by day. You can't say nighttime Shema by day. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Meir, Hachi Kamarla. Rabbi Meir says like this: Mi savrista anon ben hashmashos tidach kamina. Rabbi Meir says like this: Rabbi Yehuda, you think that I am going according to your definition of ben hashmashos? Anon ben hashmashos Rabbi Yossi kamina. I subscribe to the position of Rabbi Yossi when it comes to ben hashmashos. Rabbi Yossi ben hashmashos keherefayim. Ben hashmashos is like the blink of an eye. Zeh yotzei, zeh nichnas, v'zeh yotzei. This one comes in, right? Day comes in, or day leaves. Or I should say, night comes in and day leaves. V'efshar la'amod alav. And ultimately, again, it's impossible to go ahead and ascertain how long or how short it is. So just a word about this. We're going to do this whole sugya by itself. But remember, essentially what we have in halacha is like this. There are certain definable parts of the day. What are the definable parts of the day? Pretty much what do you have? Sunrise and sunset. Those are the definable parts of the day. After that, everything goes like a little nuts, halachically. Specifically, what is the period of time between sunset and Seis HaKochavim and nightfall? What's the status of that time? So we call that Ben Hashmashos. But there's a discussion again, is Ben Hashmashos the entire time between sunset and sunrise? Or maybe Ben Hashmashos is just like a moment before nightfall. The moment before nightfall is called. So Rabbi Meir says, I hold that Ben Hashmashos is the moment before nightfall, which means that according to Rabbi Meir, a Kohen could go to the mikvah even after sunset, as long as he does so the moment before nightfall. Okay, so now it makes a little bit more sense. Therefore, you could say that the nighttime Shema could be recited at the time that the Kohen goes to the mikvah, because in essence, according to Rabbi Meir, the Kohen could even go to the mikvah at night. Now again, we're going to get into all of this. This is going to be in the 4th parak of Berachos. We're going to deal about davening and the times for davening. We'll get more into this. So the Gemara says as follows. Top of Gimel, 3a. Kashet Rabbi Meir. So we'll say the Gemara says as follows. Here's the problem. Rabbi Meir's positions contradict themselves, because beforehand, ultimately, again, Rabbi Meir said that the time for Kriyas Shema at night is when the Kohanim go into eat Truma. And then he said, ultimately, again, it's the time that ultimately people go ahead and go in to eat their meal on Erev Shabbos. So remember again, we saw according to Rashi, when do people eat their meal on Erev Shabbos? A little bit earlier. So Rabbi Meir is contradicting himself, to which the Gemara says it's not a problem. Rabbi Meir. I will say, it's interesting. Sometimes in Gemara, not only do you have machlokes between different opinions, but sometimes you have a machlokes in what someone said. Right? So there's actually a machlokes in what Rabbi Meir himself said. Did Rabbi Meir say the nighttime Shema begins at the time that the Kohanim go into eat Truma? Or did he say at the time when people go ahead and go in to eat their Shabbos meals? Okay. Kashid Rabbi Eliezer, same idea. Ultimately, again, we have a contradiction between Rabbi Eliezer as quoted in the Brisa and Rabbi Eliezer as quoted in the Mishnah. Same answer. Trey Tanai Lib Rabbi Eliezer. This is machlokas. There was a dispute as to what Rabbi Meir said, and there was a dispute as to what Rabbi Eliezer said. The other possibility is Reisha Lav Rabbi Eliezer. The other possibility is maybe the beginning of the Mishnah doesn't reflect the view, the Reisha of the Mishnah doesn't reflect the view of Rabbi Eliezer. Fine. Shabbos say this closes out the first part of the Mishnah. So remember again, we had a whole machlokes, a whole discussion over here. When does nighttime Shema begin? Shabbos say as we close it out, remember again. So let's go back. What does the Mishnah say? When does nighttime Shema begin? When? From from the time that the Kohanim go in to eat Truma. When could Kohanim eat Truma after having gone to the mikvah by day? When can they eat Truma? Tzeis HaKochavim. And Rabbi say that is how we paskin. We close out the first part of the Mishnah. We paskin halacha l'maisa. Nighttime Shema cannot be recited before Tzeis HaKochavim, nightfall. Now, I will say, when is nightfall? So when is nightfall? So this is a big machlokes as well. Is nightfall 42 minutes after sunset? Is nightfall 72 minutes after sunset? Is nightfall 60 minutes after sunset? So if this all sounds familiar by people who hold that Shabbos ends at different times, right? What's the machlokes about when Shabbos ends? It's a machlokes as to when is nightfall. When is nightfall? Rabbi say, but halacha l'maisa, for Kriya Shema, for nighttime Shema, we have to make sure to recite Shema essentially the same time that Shabbos is over. Which is why, again, this is good to know, which is why that if you daven mincha ma'ariv, let's say again, you daven mincha ma'ariv, like here, why we have two minyanim, but the later minyan, right, we daven mincha before shkia, mincha before sunset, ma'ariv after sunset. That's why after minyan, what's the announcement? A reminder to repeat the three parashos of Kriya Shema. Why do you have to repeat Shema? Because we recited it before Tzeis HaKochavim. You're allowed to. We're going to discuss on the fourth parak. You're allowed to, but you have to repeat it again after Tzeis HaKochavim. That is based on the opening Mishnah in Maseches Berachos. Beautiful. Now I will say, so that's the first part. Remember, the second part then was, when does the time for nighttime Shema end? So we'll say, so if you remember again, we had a couple of opinions, right? The first opinion mentioned in the Mishnah was, at Sof Ha'ashmura Harishona. Right? Until the end of the first, this is Rabbi Eliezer, until the end of the first watch. So remember again, Rabbi Eliezer is agreeing, everyone, in the Mishnah everyone is agreeing, that nighttime Shema begins at Tzeis HaKochavim, begins at nightfall, and Rabbi Eliezer telling me that halacha l'maisa, it ends at the end of the first watch. So the Gemara says, what's that? End of what watch? So the Gemara says, my kasar Eliezer. What does Rabbi Eliezer hold? So I will say, listen to this. Remember, halachic day and halachic night, we're going to talk about this in the fourth chapter, is there's 24 hours in a day. There are 12 hours of daytime, 12 hours of nighttime. Now in halacha, remember again, there's a discussion, how do you measure the day? Does day go from sunrise to sunset? Does day go from dawn, ultimately again, to nightfall? We'll discuss that. But the idea is that day is 12 hours and night is 12 hours. So I will say, so therefore, if we're talking about watches at night, the question is, how many watches, so to speak, how many parts is the night divided up into? Is the night comprised of 3 parts, or is the night comprised of 4 parts? But the Gemara says, either way, why doesn't Rabbi Eliezer say like this? If he holds the night is comprised of 3 parts, let him say that you could say Shema for the first 4 hours of the night. Right, because that's what it would be, right? If the night is divided up into 3 parts, then again you have 3 4-hour shifts. Just say that you could say Shema until the end of the 4th hour after nightfall. But Rabbi Eliezer holds that the nighttime is 4 shifts, right? 4 watches, so to speak. Then lema at shalosh shos. Let him say you should say Shema up until the end of the 3rd hour. In other words, we'll say it's the same question we essentially asked before, which is just say what you mean. Just say what you mean. Instead of couching it in these terms until the end of the first watch, just tell me a time. End of 3 hours, end of 4 hours, just say it. To which the Gemara says, in reality, Rabbi Eliezer holds that nighttime is divided up into 3 watches, 3 parts, right? So we'll say, so what is the Mishnah coming to teach us? We'll say that's actually very beautiful. That the same way that the nighttime here is divided up into 3 watches, the nighttime in the celestial abode, the nighttime by HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Shamayim, is also divided up into 3 watches. There are 3 different parts to the night that are experienced by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And obviously this is metaphorical, because time itself is a human limitation. The Ribbon Shalom, remember again, one of the most incredible things about Hashem is that Hashem is past, present, and future simultaneously. Rabbi Soloveitchik coined a term for this. He called this the unitive time consciousness. I have no idea what it means, but it sounds very amazing, right? The unitive time consciousness. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu lives in past, present, and future all at once. So when we speak about God having 3 watches in the heavens, obviously it's metaphorical. God is not bound by time. God is not bound by time. But in any event, the same way that there are 3 parts to the night here in the world, Ultimately, again, there are three parts to the night in Shamayim as well. The Gemara says like this: the sign Rabbi Eliezer Omer Shalosh Mishmaros Havilayla. The night is divided up into three parts. The Al Kol Mishmar u'Mishmar, and at every watch, at every stage, Yosef Hakadosh Baruch Hu b'Shoy Ka'ari. Hashem sits on his throne and cries out like a lion. Cries out like a lion. Shnei Emar quotes the pasuk over here. Hashem mimarom yishag, umimaon kadsho yitain kalo, sha'og yishag al navehu. So I'll say the way it gets three times is because the word yishag, roar, is mentioned three times. Kadosh Baruch Hu roars out, so to speak, three times over the course of the night, once at each watch. Now, what is HaKadosh Baruch Hu crying out for? What is he roaring out for? So in the Likutei Rashi, he writes over here, Mis'abel al churban beso. Hashem mourns over the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Notice how overwhelming is that? That every single night, three times a night, the Ribono Shel Olam cries out in pain over the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. So overwhelming. Both say, just so you should understand, as great as the Beis HaMikdash was, it was a building. It was a building, right? If there's a choice between one Jewish life and the Beis HaMikdash, you would sooner give up the Beis HaMikdash to save one Jewish life. So just think about it just a moment. If the Ribono Shel Olam cries out three times every single night over the loss of the Beis HaMikdash, then imagine how much HaKadosh Baruch Hu is crying out these nights. Imagine how much pain the Ribono Shel Olam must be in over the karbanos and over the tragedies and over the losses of Klal Yisrael. Three times a night, every night, over a Beis HaMikdash, which is beautiful, which is magnificent, but it's still a structure. Alachas kama v'kama, how much he cries with us every single night as well. So the Gemara goes right there. A similar davar. And both say this is incredible. So this is interesting. The Gemara now is going to point out that you could see the different shifts of the night in the natural world. This is fascinating. He says, the similar davar, the way to tell which stage of night, which shift, so to speak, you're going to watch this. He says, Rishona, Chomer Noer, in the first shift, the donkey brays. Shnia, Klavim Tzwakim. The second shift, the dogs begin to bark. Shlishis, in the third shift, which is the last part of the night, Tinok Yonek Mishtei Imo. Ultimately, a baby wakes up to nurse. V'isha Misaparis in Baila. And a woman begins to speak with her husband. Now Rashi points out over here, that's the last part of the night where it's almost morning, where people who are sleeping next to each other, they begin to converse. It is interesting that it says it's the woman who begins to talk to the man, right? Right? The man is like, I just need 5 minutes. I just need a few more minutes, right? But again,
your alarm's going off.
I said your alarm's going off, right? Right. Can you turn that off or get up, right? Turn that right. So again, but so it's interesting. What the Gemara is pointing out over here is you could see the way these three shifts manifest themselves in the natural world. The first shift, you'll hear the donkey braying. The second shift, you'll hear the dog barking. The third shift, again, the infants are beginning to wake up, and that's the time that a couple already begins to speak. Incredible. So, Micah Chashiv Rabbi Eliezer. So we'll say, when Rabbi Eliezer, so here's the question. Which part of the shift is Rabbi Eliezer referring to? So he says, Itchilas Mishmaros Kachashiv. If he's talking about the beginning of each shift, I'm calling it a shift, I will say, but okay, watches is really, I guess, like the technical term, but the shifts of night. So ultimately, again, if he's talking about the beginning of the shifts, then again, the Gemara says, Tchilas Mishmar Rishon Siman Alamali. I don't need a sign for the first shift. Why not? Why Rabbi say? What's the sign of the beginning of the first shift? What's the sign of the beginning of the first shift? Say Sakochavim, nightfall. I don't need a sign for the beginning of that shift, right? So the Gemara says, and furthermore, it's nighttime. Sim again, Rabbi Eliezer is referring to the end of the shifts, then ultimately, Sof Mishmar Achron Alamali. Why do I need a sign for the end of the last shift? Rabbi say, what's the end of the last shift? Right? Morning, right? Dawn or sunrise. But either way, the point is there's an observable event that shows that nighttime is over, to which the Gemara says, right, Yimamahu ala chashiv sof mishmar rishon. So rather, Rabbi means like this. For the donkey's braying, that signals the end of the first shift. Tchilas mishmar achrona, when the baby wakes up, and ultimately, again, a wife begins to speak with her husband, that's the beginning of the third shift. And when you hear the dogs barking, that's the middle of the second shift. So interesting again. So in other words, donkeys braying at the end of the first shift, dogs barking middle of the second shift, baby waking up, woman begins to speak with her husband. That's the beginning of the third shift of night. V'bai, so the other possibility is, Kulu sof mishmaras kachashiv. The truth is, no, all of them really represent the end of the shift. So the donkey braying is the end of the first part of night. The dogs barking, the end of the second part of the night. A woman speaking with her husband, the baby waking up to nurse, end of the third part of the night. The Gemara says, but we just said before, I don't need a sign for the end of the third shift. Why? Because again, it's daybreak, it's dawn. I already know it. So the Gemara says, so this is interesting. You know where it could help? It could help if you are sleeping in a room without windows. You're sleeping in a room without windows. If you think about it, by the way, this is so amazing that we're seeing this Gemara now. You think about, there are many of our brothers and sisters who are sleeping in rooms without windows, going to sleep in fortified rooms, right, in their mamad, in their fortified rooms. So it's amazing. So the Gemara says, let's say you go to sleep in a room without windows. You sleep in a room without windows. So what happens? So now you wake up in the morning, it's dark. So how do you know if it's time to say Shema or not? So the Gemara says, Kevan di isha misaperes and baila, v'tinok yonik mishtei imo, likum v'likri. So again, if your wife wants to talk to you, right, or the baby begins to nurse, then ultimately, again, that's indicative that it's already morning time and it's time for Shema. Bosai, what's actually quite beautiful about this, as what you begin to see from this Gemara, is how our bodies and our souls are in sync. Right? It's like the body, like the baby wakes up, right? The baby wakes up at a time when it's time for Kriyat Shema. A couple begins to converse naturally at a time when it's time for Shema. There is this synergistic partnership between body and soul, so that even if there's no windows, the house is dark, the body as directed by the soul recognizes that the time for Shema has arrived. Incredible. Both says beautiful. There are three watches, three shifts to the night. Both say every shift, at every watch, HaKadosh Baruch Hu cries out like a lion. And he says, Oy lebanim, woe to the children, she'aba'avonosem echrafti es beisi, v'sarafti es heichali, v'heglisim lebein umo sa'olam. So this reference is back to what we said before. 3 shifts of the night, and at every shift, HaKadosh Baruch Hu roars out, cries out like a lion, and laments the fact, woe to the children, speaking to us, woe to the children who, because of their sins, I've had to destroy their home, burn down their heichal, and exile them amongst the nations. We'll say it's so powerful. The Ribono Shel Olam mourns along with us. Everything, every setback that we have to deal with, HaKadosh Baruch Hu mourns along with us, right? We don't believe in a punishing God who punishes and recedes. We believe in a loving God who, even when he has to mete out justice, is right there along with us, shouldering the pain and crying along with us. Every night, the Ribono Shel Olam cries out 3 times about the fact that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed and we were exiled. Incredible. Bosai, great story. Get ready for this. Tanya, I'm Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says as follows. Pam achos, hayisi mahalich b'derech. Rabbi Yossi says, one time I was walking on the road, v'nechnasti l'chor v'achas mechorvos Yerushalayim, l'spalo, and I entered into one of the ruins of Jerusalem to daven. So again, Rabbi Yossi is walking. Yerushalayim has already been destroyed. He sees one of the ruins. He ducks into a ruin to go ahead and daven. Eliyahu Hanavi came, and he waited for me by the entranceway of the ruin. Incredible. He waited until I finished my davening. After I finished davening, Amrali, Shalom Alecha Rebbe. Eliyahu said to Rabbi Yossi, Shalom Aleichem Rebbe. By the way, if Eliyahu Navi calls you Rebbe, you've made it. Right? That you retire, right? Right, go. That's it. You're done, right? You peaked at that, right? So Eliyahu calls him Rebbe. Shalom Aleichem Rebbe. V'amarti lo, Shalom Alecha Rebbe Umori. And Rabbi Yossi responds back to Eliyahu, peace be unto you, my Rebbe, my master and my teacher. V'amarli, b'ni, mipnei ma nichnas l'chor vazu. So Eliyahu asked Rabbi Yossi, why did you enter into the ruin? Why did you go into the ruin to daven? Amarti lo lehispalo. I went there to daven. V'amarli, hay l'cha l'hispal b'derech. Rabbi Yossi, you should have davened on the road. Don't go into the ruin, daven on the road. V'amarti lo, first wide line, Rabbi Yossi, Gimel Amud Aleph. V'amarti lo, misyari hayisi shami yafsiku bi ovrei drachim. So Rabbi Yossi said, I was nervous that if I would daven on the road, people would interrupt me. I'd get interrupted. So I figured if I duck into the ruin, no one's going to interrupt me. Va'amrali, Eliyahu said to me, you should have davened a shortened Shmona Esrei. We're going to talk about this in the fourth parak of Berachos, that there's a concept, right? Shmona Esrei is 18 brachos, became 19 brachos. There is a concept called Havinenu, which is a shortened Shmona Esrei. Essentially, it's the first 3 brachos, the last 3 brachos, and the middle 12/13 are condensed into one blessing. So I say it's interesting. So somebody once gave me a copy of the chaplaincy corps for the United States Army during World War II had a siddur printed for the soldiers. And in the siddur, it had Havinenu, shortened Shmona Esrei. It did not have full Shmona Esrei. It's fascinating. All they printed in there was Havinenu. So again, we'll discuss this in the fourth paragraph later on. So Rabbi Yossi says, Ba'osa Shah, Lemadati min hashlosh devarim. So Rabbi Yossi says, I learned 3 things in that moment. Number 1, Lemadati she'en nichnasin l'chorva. I learned, don't go into a ruin. Now, we'll discuss in tomorrow's daf, why shouldn't you go into a ruin? For the Marati, Shemispaldim Baderach, I also learned that you're allowed to daven on the side of the road. For the Marati, Shemispal Baderach, Misal Derach Tefillah Kitzar. Also, when you daven on the road, daven a shortened prayer. Daven a shortened prayer. So 3 lessons I learned. Number 1, don't go into ruins. Number 2, you're allowed to daven on the road. Number 3, when you daven on the road, daven a truncated Shmona Esrei. V'amar Bini, it's how beautiful this is. Bini, ma kol shamat b'chorvazu. Eliyahu Hanavi asked Rabbi Yossi, tell me, my son, what did you hear? Did you hear a voice when you were inside of the ruin? V'amarti lo, shamati baskol. I heard a voice. Shemenehemes kiyona. So beautiful. That was whispering like a dove. Va'omeres. And the voice said, Oy labanim sheba avonosem hechrafti es beisi. Woe to the sons, woe to the children, who because of their sins I've had to destroy their home. V'sarafti es echali, and I burnt down my temple. V'glisim lebena umos, and I exiled them amongst the nations. So Rabbi Yossi says, I heard this voice. Remember again, these are the ruins of Yerushalayim, the ruins of not necessarily not of the Beis Hamikdash itself, but the ruins of the surrounding areas. So Rabbi Yossi hears this beautiful, sweet voice like a dove, lamenting the fact that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed and Klal Yisrael has been exiled. Eliyahu said, "Va'amrli chayecha v'chari yirashecha lo shazu bilvad omeres kach." Eliyahu says, by the way, it's not just now that voice whispers its message. El b'chol yom v'yom shalosh pamim omeres kach. That voice rings out 3 times a day. Every time that Klal Yisrael davens, that voice also davens. That voice also. So Klal Yisrael is crying out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it's almost as if Kiviyachal HaKadosh Baruch Hu is crying out to Klal Yisrael. I just want you to know that I am in pain alongside of you. Whatever you're going through, you're not going through it alone. Velozu bilvad ella b'shashi. How beautiful this is. Not only that, but b'shashi yisrael nichnas lebate knesos lebate midrashos. When Klal Yisrael enters into their shuls, to their base medrash, va'onin yehei shmei hagadol mavorach. When Klal Yisrael enters into shul and they say, Amen yehei shmei rabbah, right? Amen. I affirm that God's name should be great. What happens? See what happens? He says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu mena'anea rosho. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, nods his head. Va'omer, and he says, Ashrei hamelech shemekalsin oso bebeso. Praiseworthy is the king whose subjects, whose children praise him in his home. So the Gemara says, Malo la'av shehigles banav. But woe to the father who had to exile his children. Va'aylahem lebanim shegalo mi'al shulchan avim. And woe to the children who have been exiled from the table of their father. Shabbos say this like incredible back and forth. So on one hand, you have in the ruins of Yerushalayim 3 times a day, at every shift at night, right, at every one of the watches at night, HaKadosh Baruch Hu crying out, lamenting what he has done to his children. It's profound. The depth of divine pain over the suffering of Klal Yisrael is absolutely overwhelming. Yet at the same time, when we come into shul and we answer Amen Yehei Shema, we answer it out loud, HaKadosh Baruch Hu nods his head with such a sense of nachas. But what's incredible is that moment of joy also amplifies his feelings of pain. So on one hand, we say Amen Yehei Shmei Rabbah. He's filled with such nachas, filled with such joy, but that reminds him of the fact that what? We've been exiled. It reminds him that we're not where we are supposed to be. So this incredible dialectic of HaKadosh Baruch Hu getting nachas on one hand from the things we do, but in the moment of nachas also reminded of the incredible pain over the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash and the subsequent dispersion of the Jewish people. And I will say, this is the story of our people. This is the dynamic of Baruch Hu. Nachos from the accomplishments of his children, but also pain over the suffering of his children. I will say, I'll just end off. I'll tell you something very beautiful. Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotz, the Kotzker says something incredible. If you look at that story, the way the story of Rabbi Yossi begins, it says, Rabbi Yossi, Pam achas heisi mahalich baderech, v'nechnasti l'churva. So I will say, so listen to this. So the Kotzker says it's an incredible metaphor. That sometimes you're walking down the path of accomplishment in life. Derech, I'm walking down the path of accomplishment. And then what happens? For whatever the reason, I take a wrong turn. And where do I enter into? The ruins. What do the ruins represent? The ruins represent the bad decisions. The ruins represent the bad turns. And Lamaisa again, remember, Eliyahu Hanavi doesn't prevent Rabbi Yossi from going into the ruins. Right? Why not? Why not? God lets me make my own mistakes. You can make your own mistakes, but here's the beauty of it. As soon as Rabbi Yossi comes out of the churvas, as soon as he comes out of the ruins, who's waiting for him? Who's waiting for him? Eliyahu Hanavi. You see, in life, all of us make mistakes. Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't prevent me from making my mistakes because that's part of my free will. But here's the beauty. After I recognize my mistake, and I'm ready and willing to turn things around, Eliyahu Hanavi, Kadosh Baruch Hu Kiviyachol, is right there waiting for me to help me turn things around in life. You're going down the derech, you make a wrong turn into the churvan, to the ruins, nothing's going to stop you. But the moment you decide to emerge and get back on the right path in life, just know that the Ribono Shel Olam is there to assist you every step of the way. All right, Shkoyach, what a daf. Again, I will say, such a chizik to say everyone in the basement. Beautiful.